lovely people, I'm Sammi. Welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. This week, I want to talk about The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, one of the trending books on Book Talk and Bookstagram right now. I obviously had to pick it up because it is being recommended all over the place constantly. So when I started reading this book, I was feeling very homesick. So I have to put a disclaimer out there and say, please do not read this book if you are feeling homesick. Do not start this book while feeling homesick. It will make you feel worse. Aside from that, I think it's a really great book. I gave it 4 stars when I finished reading it. I kind of understand the hype around it. I probably wouldn't personally hype it up as much as everybody else is, but that could also just be because of my homesickness, that I wouldn't be like raging and hollering and excited about it. I think it's a really unique concept. I haven't ever read anything that has something similar to this story. This kind of balance between the Christian God and old gods and good and bad and deals and promises. This kind of balance between this old magic and its relationship to the people in the world. I think the story really gives a great juxtaposition between a lot of things. If somebody were to say, give me an example of a book that uses juxtaposition well, this is perfect for that because it juxtaposes old gods and their powers with new gods, the new God, Christian God, and his powers. They don't show up, but like the people who worship the old gods versus the people who worship the new Christian God, it juxtaposes that. It juxtaposes the past from the present because we get these alternating timelines between the present 2014 time and any time before that from 1690 onwards. It's so interesting to see those times juxtaposed back to back like that from the same perspective, which is so unique. And then there's also the juxtaposition between Henry, our human love interest, and Luce. I'm gonna go with Luce. And Luce, our God character, who thinks he's a love interest, which is just so many good juxtapositions. And they're so interesting when you're paying attention to them. Once you notice that they're there, it's so interesting to see how they play out. And even from Addie's perspective, we see her juxtaposing them and juxtaposing these things. And when she draws attention to it, your readers can't not draw attention to it. And it also has this kind of vibe about it that makes it feel real, even though everything about it is obviously fiction. It's so genuine. The character's genuine. The feelings they go through are genuine. The way that the story goes, that it feels real in a similar way that Daisy Jones and the Six did, where it felt like it could have been a real, genuine band. Like, I feel like if I were to reach out to the god of forest nights, that something like this would happen. And it's terrifying and really beautiful. Like, it's really just great because of how well it's written. It's so realistic and believable. The author also uses that and really draws on it by putting the story within the story. It's so meta, but I love it. I love it when that happens because if I already feel like the story is real and then you put the story within the story, it's just so much better. So much better for me. I think that there's a lot of things that we can learn from this book too. It's obviously a really great representation of juxtaposition and how you can use juxtaposition to strengthen your characters. Between our 2 male characters that we follow and we are interacting with on the regular, we are able to learn about the other one through the juxtaposition. You can learn about Luce through Henry and Henry through Luce, and it's just because of how strong the juxtaposition between them is. You get to learn from their opposites. If Henry does this, you can expect something very different from Luce. So interesting to look at. It's also a great example of deciding between a linear versus a nonlinear timeline and how to use that to the best of your ability. If this book were told in a linear timeline, it probably wouldn't have been as impactful as it is in the timeline that it's given here, because we get to go back and forth and we get to see those times juxtaposed back to back. And it's really interesting the way that it's told in a nonlinear format, because we know the differences of what's going on and where we are in the present. And it also gives the opportunity to build tension in a way that a linear timeline wouldn't. Like, you can end a chapter on a cliffhanger, something that you want to know the answer to desperately, and then go back to a different time and end that on a cliffhanger and maybe never go back to it. Maybe you just wonder how that turned out. Maybe you go back and you continue on. Maybe you go back to a different time that you don't expect to relate to it, and then it relates to that time that was never resolved. And it really draws you into the experience that Addie's having, because Addie has a lot of unresolved encounters because of the curse that she's got. And the fact that she is invisible. She's got all of these unresolved, conclusionless stories. And it's really, really interesting to see that experience mimicked through the storytelling for the readers. We get the same, oh no, I didn't get an answer, I never got to say goodbye, that kind of feeling that Addie's having throughout the whole story, just because of the nonlinear timeline and the way that the author alternates and ends scenes. I also think the author did a really, really great job with perspectives, because there are times when we are no longer in Addie's perspective, but because of the neutral voice that's narrating the story, we are able to just follow through and not have to question it. And this is something that I've seen other authors do ineffectively. I think it's something that I mentioned in my Mistborn video. Your third person over the shoulder perspective can change as long as it's done effectively, as long as your reader knows what's happening and it's not like a jarring switch in the middle of a chapter. Giving the opportunity to follow both of the characters and see both sides of the situation makes the story a lot stronger and a lot more interesting, and you don't have to add another perspective by using that third person perspective. You don't have to establish this person early on the way that you would a first person perspective. So if you're switching from like, I'm Sammi and I'm talking and this is how the story goes because I'm telling you how the story goes, to like, I'm Shane and I'm talking and this is how the story goes, you really have to establish both of those voices earlier on in the story. But having a neutral third person voice that fluidly switches between two perspectives doesn't need to be established earlier on. It can come at any point as long as it's a smooth transition, which I think the author did a really great job of doing in this book. I do think that this book may be a little bit overhyped. I guess it's not really super important because it's a good book. Like, I would recommend it to someone who's looking for something specific. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it to anybody who's just looking for something to read. I would recommend it to somebody looking for something like a little bit sad with love and like, I don't know. It would come to me in the moment if the right person asked me for a recommendation, but I wouldn't just recommend it like I would some of the other books that I've read. It didn't give me the same book talk energy that the other books that I've read that have been really popular on Book Talk, like The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo and Daisy Jones and the Six. Those two books gave me like a lot of joy. And then even I think The Song of Achilles made me a little bit more like glad that I read it when I finished. I think that's a little bit more of a closer to how I feel about this book in terms of the recommendability. I'm not saying that it doesn't deserve people to enjoy it. Like, it's a good book. It's 4 out of 5 stars. It's a good book. But I don't think that it is on the same level as some of the other books that have been recommended in the same platform. And I'm not sure if that's a direct, I didn't feel great when I first started reading it response, or if it is directly related to the actual story. And I usually like to focus on what I can tangibly say about the story in these videos, but I don't know for sure. I'll have to reread it in like a year and come back to this and see how I feel about it afterwards. But right now, I just think it's a little bit overhyped. Still a good book. I would recommend it in certain situations. We can definitely learn from it, especially if you want to play with juxtaposition. If you've read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, talk to me in the comments. Tell me what I'm missing. Why is it so hyped? What was your experience of it? Were you homesick? Because that would be a crazy coincidence. Let's have a book chat in the comments. I really like doing those, so anything that you have to say, just let me know. If you like this video, please leave a like down below. It'll really help me out and show YouTube that maybe more people would like this video. I will be back on Tuesday for a Writing Tip Tuesday video and back again on Saturday for another Story Study Saturday. If you don't want to miss out on those, please hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. I will see you in your notifications bar and you won't miss a single upload from me.